And we're live. Hello, everyone. Hello, friends. Here today, we're going to be talking about dashboards and making your dashboards really compelling so they can actually drive the decisions that you want the room to take and the direction and the strategic alignment that you're seeking from your dashboards. Today, here with me, we have Bill Shander. Bill, hello. Thank you so much for spending your time here with us and sharing your expertise.
Hello, Christina. I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Now we're going to dive straight in, Bill. I hope that's okay with you.
Of
I want to
course.
give people as much value for their time as we possibly can. So I'm going to dive straight into the middle of the AI ocean. AI can generate the dashboard in seconds. It can provide all sorts of different data. It can give us an overview of everything that we want. How is that not working for us?
I mean, volume is always a problem, right? Essentially, if I can do everything and I do everything, and I'm trying to tell my audience that everything is important, then what happens is we say, oh, actually, I guess nothing's important. Because if you try to throw 8 million numbers in front of me, I can't even process them. So, too much is not good ever. I will say at the same time, AI being able to do that, when I put on my analyst hat versus my communicator's hat, AI generating a bunch of options for me to consider, and then I can carefully select and pick which ones I'll actually put into my dashboard. That's one of the good sides of that same. Well, it's good and bad because I also might get overwhelmed making those selections for my dashboard, but it's
Mm.
potentially a good thing because AI can obviously speed up the process and put options in front of me. But your discernment becomes extremely important to point the most useful things to your audience. And that has to do with one of the most important ideas in psychology, which is chunking. Like you have to give people one idea at a time. And the closer to one idea at a time, the better they'll be able to perform.
Mm. So we can ask the AI to generate it, but then also there is benefit of iterating that and getting it to simplify whatever's in front of us. Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to simplification, what are some of the tips that you can give us from your 30 years experience of being a data viz whiz?
Yeah.
How should people apply that when the AI is providing so much information? And sometimes the tricky part is we're not necessarily highly specific in the question, and the AI comes up with a bunch of stuff. So how do we sieve through this?
Yeah. I mean, so when I'm teaching data storytelling and data visualization in workshops and in my courses on LinkedIn, what I always say is you have to know what to focus in on. And essentially, there are three legs of the stool: what the data is saying. So you have to understand your data. You have to know what your audience needs to hear, which is the
Mm,
key. And yes, what you really want to say. So there's also like your sort of point of view, your perspective. But the most
mm,
important, I mean, they're all equally important. They really are, they have to be balanced. It's not like what I want to say at the expense of the truth and the data, certainly not.
yeah.
But the what your audience needs is the one that you have to like really be like your North Star, your guiding light. And so, AI has thrown 800 things at me, and 250 of them may be really interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. But is this going to help my audience today, right now, to make the decision they're supposed to be making? Oh, yeah, maybe not. It's interesting, but not actually important or useful. And so,
Mm,
if you can sort of constantly tap back into your audience's perspective, what do they really need right now? That's
mm,
like the quickest and easiest way to start just pulling out the junk. Like super interesting number over here, but not useful. Super interesting, not useful. Oh, not even interesting. Goodbye. So,
yeah.
the way to start throwing stuff out is just to have an extremely attuned understanding of your audience actual needs. And then from there, of course, there are other things you can do, but that's like number one for sure.
Yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of a paradox between what the audience needs and what they want to see. So
Yes.
I'd
Yes.
love to hear more about this from your side. I know you've spoken about this in the past. You've got a great story about your rankings dashboard and how that's affected the whole dynamic in the conversation? Tell us
Yeah.
more.
Sure. Yeah. And in fact, I wrote an entire book about this because it's such an important topic that no one ever really talks about in detail, or they certainly don't sort of talk about how to do it. But the basic idea is our audience often, I almost said never, and honestly, it is pretty much almost never, but they often don't know what they actually need. They only do know, they only are tapped into what they want. And so, and there's two components to that, which hopefully I'll remember to swing back to the second part. But like, all right, I want the data about XYZ. Okay, well, why do you want that data? Well, because that's how it's always done. And so I ask for things in a certain way as a client, as a stakeholder, and it's just the automated way of doing things. I'm not even really consciously thinking about it. My subconscious is driving the bus. And so when you deliver what they've asked you for, you're already on the wrong footing. You're not giving what they actually need. So, an example, let's say you're in a company and they said, oh, give me data on sales from last quarter. Okay, here's the sales numbers from last quarter. Well, I didn't really mean sales. I meant profits. Well, why didn't you say profits? All right, here's the profits from last quarter. Oh, well, our last quarter's numbers are helpful, but it's certainly more helpful if I can see it over the last previous 10 years also. Oh, well, you didn't say that. So you're constantly, really trying to figure out what they actually need based on that vague or incorrect initial request. And so that process of what I call stakeholder whispering is mission critical. I mean, you have to understand that underlying need that, like we just said, they don't even necessarily know themselves. And then add on top of that, the second component, which I miraculously did remember to bring up, which is that what I want is I want good numbers. Tell me that we're doing well. So I'm even like that bias also factors in. So if you come back and the data actually shows, sales are worse off than we thought and the company's in bad shape, I don't want to see that. Is there anything we can do to spin those numbers, right? So you also have to manage that aspect of these conversations, which can be difficult, especially when you have like a dynamic of hierarchy, your boss sort of asking you to do things that may be unethical or certainly, questionable in the context like that. But yeah, people don't know what they need, and your job, your most important first job, is to help them figure that out. From everything, from there, everything gets easier.
Yeah, and I feel that resonates so much with change work as well and business transformation. When we're clearly defining what the problem is and the outcome that we're seeking to achieve, like everything seems to flow in a much more aligned fashion versus let's just do X for the sake of, showing the good numbers and not necessarily telling the whole story.
Right. I mean, AI is a perfect example. It's like, oh, I guess we should put AI in it. Well, why? Who said we should do AI? And that's like the biggest change management story on earth right now in every organization there is. And we're not slowing down enough to say, well, why are we putting AI in it? What will AI really help with, et cetera? And yeah, it's classic. It's been going on forever.
Yes. Yeah. I feel though, with the approach of being really clear in the outcome and the problem statement, it's almost like you need that years of experience behind your back to push back on some senior stakeholders and go, well, hold on a minute. Let's first define what we're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah.
If you're a junior analyst, what would your advice be to someone who's junior and stuck in that position?
Yeah, it's super hard, right? You haven't earned the trust of the senior executive yet, so that you can't just say, "Hey, hold on," It's hard to have that conversation, but what you can do is you can always ask one question, two questions. So they've thrown something at you. You can't literally push back that hard, but you can say, "All right, well, it's very similar to the question you just said. It's, well, how are we going to measure success? How are we going to know if this thing worked?" And that question is a very common question. We're all taught to ask that, but that starts to get towards the same thing. Like, what does that angle really look like? What are we really trying to accomplish? But you're asking it by asking how we're going to measure success, because that starts to define the goal sort of through the back door a little bit. The other question that, I think even the most junior analyst can ask is, tell me more. I'm not sure I completely understand yet. Can you just fill me a little bit more and, just your thoughts about this thing? And it's vague, and a very impatient stakeholder may bristle at that a little bit, but odds are they understand you're a junior and that you're just trying to get as much information as you can. And a good boss, a good stakeholder will indulge you with a little bit more color around that request. And that starts to get you down the road. And as you start to work with those people again and again and again, and you start to gain trust. Before you know it, you're asking 2 questions, 3 questions, 5 questions, and you do get to the point where you can say, whoa, hold on. Let's circle back here, and to be a little bit more forceful in how you guide them. Because again, your job is to actually guide them to help them figure out what they're really asking of. Because they don't really, like I said, they're not really asking of you what they actually need, because they're not completely aware of it frequently.
Yeah, I love the call to tell me more. I think that's a really powerful question that you can just leave there for a little bit for people to gather their thoughts and the background information that would serve really well in the long term.
Yeah.
I wanted to also ask you about the identity gap that you may or may not see in the data world. So when AI can generate the numbers in a matter of seconds or minutes, the people that used to be in charge of looking after those numbers and generating those numbers, how are they feeling at the moment? Are they feeling like some of that identity is being taken away from them? Are they feeling like they need to really upskill in AI? Or are they feeling like, actually, that's giving me space to do more judgment and more strategic work?
Yes. I think it's the full spectrum, just like in every other role. Some people are feeling very empowered by AI, and they're leveraging it, and they're figuring out ways that it can actually make them better at what they do. Other people are definitely afraid of it and intimidated by it and freaking out, to be perfectly frank.
Mm,
Um, I do think that, and I don't. Nobody can predict what AI is going to really do to the workplace in any role, whether within data or beyond. And I think obviously the people. Every time there's been a technological revolution, the people who figured out how they could find their footing within that change are the
mm,
ones who become the leaders down the road, right? And so this one is particularly scary. It's certainly the scariest one that I've lived through. Um, but I think people are very quickly pivoting to see, okay, yeah, AI does enable me to do this, and I can use it in this way, and it'll make me better at my job. But that doesn't keep the fear completely at bay, because obviously, the speed at which it's happening is just unimaginable.
mm,
But my advice to people certainly would be, anybody who's like not playing with AI right now is making a huge, huge, huge mistake if you're not
mm,
planning, your next 10 years. That being said, playing with AI also means experimenting with a lot of different tools, looking at it from a lot of different perspectives, including, is there something else I can and should be doing with my life? Because AI will replace some of those tasks. And so
mm.
you have to be like incredibly agile and willing to pivot, but you got to be in the game. You got to be, boots on the ground to figure out what to do about this thing that's coming.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear how you're using AI, because I have been absolutely. I mean, I'm a tech enthusiast, and I love using the tools. Most of the time, I don't have a massive team around me, so having that extremely knowledgeable assistant slash business analyst slash intern on my team is absolutely amazing. But as you say,
Yeah.
like it's a lot of experimenting. It's a lot of time that it's kind of like playing, but also figuring things out and how I can use it to make me more efficient and more giving more admin tasks to it, rather than making it do the judgment or making it do the really important strategic calls that I wanted to make. Curious to
Yeah.
hear how you use it, Bill.
So, having just said that everybody should be boots on the ground and playing with it, et cetera, I'm using it very little, to be perfectly honest. I use it for research for sure. I use it occasionally to um, brainstorm ideas. Like, I'll give an example. Like when I was doing writing my book, I didn't use it to
Mm,
write a single word of the book, but I was having a really hard time coming up with a title that I liked. And so I used
yeah.
to try to generate book title ideas. So I use it sort of in tangential ways in what I'm doing. I'm not using it at all to increase my efficiency, for an example. Like, and I don't know why that is. I think partly it's I'm not ready to let AI into my machine. Like, I don't want to use agentic AI. I don't trust the technology enough from that standpoint. I also am very um, skeptical of AI from the standpoint of hallucination. So I'm afraid to use it for a lot of the data work that I do. It's not very good at generating charts and graphs. Is certain, like Copilot within Power BI, decent at generating ideas, but not stuff that I would put in front of a client. And I tend to be more on the putting stuff
Right.
in front of a client, not the data analytics side of things and the work that I do anyways. So while I've played with it, I'm not using it in the way a lot of people in my world are using it. So, and I'm skeptical, like I said. But that being said,
Mm,
I was talking to a friend the other day who said, the basic idea is that, someone's going to come up with a tool where AI, in fact, there's a company working on something right now that seems very, very promising, where AI will be amazing at doing the data analytics and you won't have to worry about hallucination because it's tied to a vector database, et cetera, times 100.
mm,
But we're just not quite there yet. And so while I'm trying to be aware of the space and playing with it a little bit, I'm definitely, if some people are up here using AI and, my mother is down here, they probably never touched it. I'm somewhere in here, definitely below the
mm.
average, I would say, is my guess.
Yeah, and I guess to summarize from what you were saying, if you are using it to gather data and to make a dashboard, make sure that you double, triple check
Yeah.
those figures, because it is known to, put things here and there and
Yeah.
everywhere.
And by the way, one of the reasons I'm not using it, in addition to the nervousness about those issues, is that an educator, right? I do different work now. I'm not doing that much data work. I'm doing writing.
Mm,
I'm creating
mm,
curricula for courses, et
mm.
cetera, and then delivering courses. And in that world, I don't want AI. It needs to be my experience that I'm expressing.
Yeah.
And so my role is very different from the people who I'm educating. If I was a
Mhm.
data analyst, a data visualization person, doing project work, creating dashboards day in, day out, I would be playing with AI a lot more because I do think it's good
Mm.
advice, but
Yeah.
being very cautious about it still.
Yes. Yeah. Um, if we're talking to somebody junior here and it's changing direction slightly, and
Mhm.
they go, "Oh, I like numbers, but I see there's a lot of technological advancement in that side, and I don't know if I should invest my time into being a data person." Um, I was hoping that you can maybe give us a little bit of your personal story of how you became interested in that, and maybe when you were at school, or maybe when you were at college, and you noticed that you definitely had an inkling for that. Like, how would people spot that they're data people, and if they're trying to find their niche in a ever changing world?
Yeah. I mean, my story is when I was a kid, a fairly small kid, we used to get National Geographic magazine. Okay. And National Geographic is one of those magazines that people like collect, right? They have like shelves full of these magazines. And I used to do like I would come across these copies and I would hold on to them forever. And I'd be looking at them constantly. The same magazine, issue I'd look at, 40 times over, 12 months. And they always had really beautiful, interesting infographics, right? Like the
Mm,
maps showing where the wildebeests roam in Africa at a certain time of year, or all kinds of other scientific things expressed in a visual form. And I always thought they were so cool. Then I go to college, I go to grad school, and I'm starting to do computer-based stuff. And I started reading Wired magazine.
mm,
Wired magazine, also back in like the 2000s during the dot-com boom, did these infographics that I just loved. They were bright and colorful and sometimes super simple and sometimes very overwhelming and complex. But I just fell in love with infographics. And so that's how I came to this idea that, oh, right, numbers can be expressed in this very visual, very expressive, very not technical way. Um, and as someone who's an English major undergrad, I like expression of ideas. I wasn't really like a numbers person, although I always liked math too. But long story short, that's how I got into it.
mm,
And so I would say for a junior person, if you really like, if you like visuals, you like communications and that side of data, boom, like you're golden, and AI is still bad at that. So, for and the person who can figure out how to leverage AI to do it well is going to succeed. If you're just someone who loves numbers and statistics and sort of crunching numbers that way, obviously AI is going to take your job in that, you can ask AI to do something and it'll come up with a very complicated analysis in 5 seconds. But still, you have to be the one to the questions to ask. And so that still can be an exciting thing going forward. If you're someone who wants to, build dashboards or do some other, data engineering and all these things, the more technical it is, obviously, the more AI may automate of that work. But again, the most important thing that we bring to the table as humans is our discernment and the judgment and understanding what really needs to be done. So no matter which end of that spectrum you're on, if you're the person who can sort of look strategically, 30,000 foot view, why are we asking these questions of this data? What does this data really look like? What is the goal? What are we supposed to do with this data once we crunch those numbers? Then you're going to be the success story. And the people who are simply, well, I just want to sit at my keyboard all day and crunch numbers manually, those are the jobs that are going to be automated away to some degree. So just be cautious. So be a strategic thinker, no matter what you do, is the advice I would give.
Yeah, I love that call. We just got a comment from somebody who's joined us on the live saying, my parents used to get the National Geographic Kids Edition. I can relate. Oh, fantastic to hear.
That's great.
I love those charts as well. Yeah, and I suppose circling back to what you were saying, Bill, with the strategic thinking and understanding the story around the numbers that we're trying to say with the dashboard that we're presenting. I mean, AI can generate the numbers and it can generate the dashboard, but it cannot tell the story just yet. So that's the leverage that we as human beings have in that room. I'd like to hear more from you because I know you've got a whole framework around storytelling and how that plays out in the real world.
Yeah.
If somebody had to present a dashboard, what is the most powerful tool that they have in their box without the dashboard put on one
the most
side?
important thing is back to those 3 focal points. I call them the whys. Know what your data is saying, know what your audience needs to hear, know what you really want to say. So know what you is always the beginning, KWY, why. And so, at every moment in any work, any knowledge work, this isn't just data, but any work, if you constantly circle back to your audience, what does my audience need? Then that tells you what the story is. Because again, you can crunch numbers all day long. You can come up with 8,000 slides of interesting data points. And a lot of times our PowerPoint decks look like that, right? Or our dashboards, 8 million charts, and it's all interesting. We worked really hard to pull that data, so I guess we should show it all, like a lot of CYA going on. But right now, the question was, how are we doing with our, Transformation X project? Oh, well, tell me more about what do you, when you say, how are we doing, what are you most worried about? Well, this month we're most worried about, payroll costs and how they're being changed because we're letting these people go and bring these people into for the new technology. Okay, let's look at the HR data. Now we're really focused on retention versus like, what do we really care about right now? Okay, well, that's the actual data from which the story will evolve. And based on your biggest concerns or the biggest issue that we know is the scary thing this month or the happy thing, that's going to drive the story. And so, storytelling is one of these words that is intimidating to some people because it implies like, oh, I have to be a storyteller. I have to be creative. Like, what are you asking of me? No. All you need to do is share the insights and share them in a logical way that flows. And so, you don't have to get all fancy. You just have to recognize what is the key insight here in this moment, which is always back to what does my audience need from me? So, to me, storytelling is simply a logical progression of the most important ideas. And, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give people, you have an hour-long meeting next week to go over the data about that big transformation project. Go in there with a 5 to 10 minute story and leave 45 to 50 minutes for Q&A. And everyone will love you. And you're going to tell a more effective story that is probably going to get right to the heart of the matter because you're going to throw out 45 minutes of garbage that nobody wanted to hear anyways.
I love that advice. It is so on point. And I think if if you give people the space to think about it and to ask the questions that they want to ask and get those answered in that space and time, you're a lot more likely to get to the outcome sooner rather than trying to get to another meeting and have another conversation about it and just spinning around.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, with the conversations and the stories, what is the one conversation that pops into your head that you're most proud of in your lengthy career?
One story that I tell in the book is about this project where I was working on a very large web-based data, not dashboard, but a data tool. And it was to showcase essentially like the ranking of countries based on their performance against these certain sort of measures, just to keep it semi-vague. Long story short, the way this company is an insurance company always showed the ranking was literally just rank. This country's number one, this country's number two, this country's number three. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it turned out that in this one of these many measures that we were showing, the score was really interesting. So like as an example, there's 130 countries in this ranking. And for this one measure, the top 105 of the countries had awesome scores. They were amazing. So the difference between the number one country and the number 47 country and the number 103 it didn't matter. But if you looked at just the rank, you'd be like, 103, they're terrible. And so I had this really long back and forth conversation with the client to say, hey, maybe we should be showing the scores and not the rank. And this sounds very like inside baseball, kind of boring, like who cares? But this was really important because essentially this was going to have a huge impact on what insurance rates companies in these countries paid. And it was also, therefore, if people misunderstood the numbers, they might understand all kinds of things about their insurance. Long story short, we went back and forth on this 100 times with this one client. She almost convinced me over and over and over again that the rank was the right number to show because it usually was for this particular index. But in this particular example, the score was the better thing to show, or really both, right? And so, it was like on the scale of excitement, not the most exciting conversation I've had in my life whatsoever, but in terms of the ability to have a highly nuanced conversation about an extremely sort of dry, specific, number-oriented conversation. And the stakes weren't life and death. It was just one of these like very nuanced conversations where there was that moment where the light bulb went off and my client literally said, oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, I think you're right. And it wasn't because I was right. That's not why it was exciting. It was because it was that nuanced back and forth. And we've all had complicated business meetings where it was a gray area conversation. The decision wasn't obvious. But, if you have that open-ended conversation with, trust and balance on both sides, where you're really listening to the other person and truly having a back and forth, not just trying to make your point, it's just kind of exciting when that all works out. And it's one of the stories I told in the book because it is one of the most important moments in my career, and in learning how to do stakeholder whispering, especially.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I really see it as a Venn diagram of our both worlds intersecting, stakeholders and data. Like if you focused on the numbers, it's a great area. It gives you a story, but unless you're able to tell that story and to create the psychological safety and the trust within that meeting and to get to an outcome, the numbers don't lead you there just by themselves, right?
Yeah. And the numbers, the rank position is a valid and good number. Like that was totally useful for 99% of this project. But in this one example, it was useless. It was literally pointless. And so, yeah, being able to say, yes, it's good here, but maybe not so good here, and talk about it honestly was really special.
Yeah, fantastic. I have a quote here, and I'd love to hear more about it. I've got a quote that you've said, or somebody said to you, listen with your ears and not your brain. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and what it means to you?
Yeah, that's funny. The person who said that to me is from that company that I was just talking about. Not the person I had that conversation with, but one of the other clients there. The basic idea is that, what he was trying to say is that, what we often do is we listen and we're just like waiting for our opportunity to respond, right? So in other words, we're already in our heads. We're not really listening. We're just thinking of our response and
Mm.
teeing it up perfectly. Where, if you really listen with your ears, the implication, what he meant was that you're really listening. You're really, it's coming in here, and I'm focusing on that, and I'm not focusing on my own thoughts. And of course, that's really hard to do. Like, right now, you're thinking of a follow-up question because your job is to do this interview. I'm thinking about what you're asking of me and the stories I'm going to tell as you start to describe it, because I got to answer quickly, right? So it's impossible to do that perfectly, and especially in a business meeting where your job is to have that follow-up, have that response, or the follow-up question, etc. But as best as you can do it, you need to do it. And listening is truly listening is a very, very hard skill, but it's something that you can learn over time.
Mm. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Bill. It's really powerful. We've got a couple of comments that I think will be really nice to feature. We've got a comment from, unfortunately, the name hasn't come through. It just says LinkedIn user, but the comment says, on a stage while I'm dealing to fix some marketing intelligence dashboard at midnight in Europe. What a chance to open LinkedIn and find out this live session. That's great. Thank you.
That's
So
nice.
glad to hear that this is giving you something to think about. If you've got any more specific questions, then please feel free to put those down in the comments and we'll try to answer them live or after the session. And oh my goodness, midnight in Europe. I hope you get to finish that soon. We've got another comment from Václav. The question I ask when designing a dashboard is, if I show you this data, what are you going to do with it? Will you make more money? Does that resonate, Bill?
It does, and it's funny. I was just doing one of my workshops for a client 3-4 days ago, and I just added a new slide to the workshop. And it's an idea that I always talk about, but it warranted a slide, which is that every dashboard has to be actionable, right? A dashboard doesn't exist, or any data story, any PowerPoint deck, any meeting, anything. You're there for a reason. It has to be actionable. There has to be an outcome. And you better know what it is. Your stakeholder better know what it's supposed to be. You may not know the answer, yes, no, left, right, good, bad, whatever, but there's some reason that you're there having that conversation. So that's another ball to keep that eye on at all times. Like, what is the actual point of this? What is the actual thing that's supposed to occur after this?
Yeah, fantastic. And while we're on the topic of, what's the actionable thing as a takeaway, I would be really hoping that we can define what is that one or two things that people that are listening to us right now can take away from this conversation. And if somebody's got a dashboard to present at tomorrow's meeting, the marketing intelligence dashboard, what is the one thing that you think is super important for them to tick against? And I'd love to hear your side of the story, and then I'd love to give them my perspective from a people/change transformation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my first advice for dashboard design is always, always, always. And I phrase this a few different ways. The two-word phrase that I always use is do less. And it ties back to what I said before about the idea of chunking. If you have a dashboard with 800 charts on it, and every data point is labeled and there's a million things going on, I don't know where to look. I don't know how to accomplish that one task I'm supposed to accomplish. I'm overwhelmed. I want to cry. Okay. But the idea of chunking, give me one idea at a time. If you can make your dashboard, instead of a true dashboard, one chart, and it's incredibly minimal and just points at this number is bad news, do something about this, then that's going to be an effective thing. And so the chunking is one of the reasons that works so well. And the other thing that I love to teach people about is the idea of pre-attentive processing. Every visual experience that you have in your life occurs subconsciously. It occurs in an instant. It's pre-attentive, before you're paying attention. The reason this is good to know and to remember is that when you have 800 charts going on, my pre-attentive response is overwhelm, right? But if you have one chart and it's all gray, but one bright red number over here and it's something pointing at it, then literally at a glance, I can't help but see it. So whether I phrase it as do less, whether I remind you of chunking, or I say design for the glance. So when someone glances at your dashboard, at that moment, instantaneously, can they start to at least see where to look to figure out the important bits? They may not be able to figure it out. Complexity has a place, but design for the glance, because then everything else should be thrown away. You're narrowing it down to the most important stuff, which is going to help everybody do what they need to do. So that's my number one bit of advice. Always, always, always.
Yeah, I love it. And I think to build on this from a people's perspective is always to understand who's in the room that will be having a look at the charts or at the dashboard. Who will they be showing it to next? Because even though you may be the presenter, you may not be in the next room that's talking about your numbers. And so they need to relate the same story that you tell to the next room or to the next person. So number one, understand who's in the room. Number two, understand where these numbers may be discussed again and again in another room without you. And then I guess the third, from my perspective, will be, what is the decision that you're ultimately trying to make? Because if you understand the overall goal and that is aligned to the overall direction and strategy of the project, of the transformation, of the change that you're trying to make, then you have a lot more leverage with the information that you're presenting.
Yeah, I love that. And to address, especially the second point that you made, I'm going to give my second bit of advice, which is always have a storytelling point of view, even in a dashboard design. People say, I can't design a dashboard with a story because I don't know what the story is. It's dynamic data. It's always changing. But I say, yes, you can. And so the simplest example is this. If you just throw a dashboard, you have a bar chart with a bunch of bars on it. No highlighting, no color, no nothing to tell me which is the interesting bit. Then you as a presenter, okay, well, you can concentrate on that important bar over here. But to your point, the next person presenting when you're not there doesn't know which bar is the most important one. So they might talk about something else. But if you design the dashboard so when the bars hit a certain threshold, they change color, or some other trigger that makes it highlight in a way that is relevant to the goal of the day and all the stuff that you just mentioned, now the next person who's presenting it can't help but see the most important story also, even though you're not there reminding them. So design the dashboard to tell stories for you by using highlight colors and things strategically. And again, you have to be very careful how you do that, because the most important decision today is about XYZ happening. Well, make sure that color changes based on some threshold that is relevant to that decision being made. But yeah, those things are incredibly important. Everything you said, I agree with.
Yeah, I love that. And I again, I really like how our two worlds really intercept quite clearly here from our conversation. You know, it's not two separate pieces of you focus on the data and I focus on the storytelling. No, they're both intertwined and they're both pretty important.
Yeah.
I'd be really keen to shape that as a bit of a checklist for everyone that's listening to us at the moment. And they can, you know, go away and have a look at their little checklist and go, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Does it pass the test for my presentation tomorrow? So if you're happy with that, Bill, anyone that's interested in having that as a bit of a takeaway, if you comment checklist in the comments below, just below the live conversation, then I'll make sure that I send that through to you. We've got a couple of more comments. Somebody saying yes with a lot of exclamation marks. I think that means they're agreeing to us, and this was really useful for them. So thank you for joining us. And one last comment we've got. I always mute the successful data in a dark gray, bluish color if I'm using a dark mode, and a splash of color for the outlier/problem numbers.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm really glad that this resonates with people and they can learn from what you've got to offer, Bill. Now, before we close out, I wanted to mention, if you guys who are with us listening on this live conversation or joining us live, if you want to hear more from Bill or upskill yourself in some of these methods, Bill has got a new course coming up, and we'll drop it in the link down below. Also, Bill, if people want to get in touch with you or want to follow you, what's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. There's always my website, which is just billshander.com. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. Anybody can follow me there, and always happy to connect and talk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Bill. Appreciate all of the knowledge that you've shared here with us. And once again, if you guys are interested in grabbing that checklist, please just make sure you comment checklist and I'll send that through to you. Thank you, everyone. Have an amazing
Thank you.
day.